So over the next 10 years, small businesses are going to have almost unlimited potential to scale. Not because they hire more people, but because they have use of smarter systems.
The ability to learn AI and be a first mover and to become indispensable to other businesses, or to start your own one-man business and build a $100 million company as a single person, there is the opportunity for that.
Christian Johnson, Marine Corps veteran, powerlifter, and operator, where if there's anyone that I know that's going to make $1 billion this next 10 years building a company with AI, it is hands down you.
I'm way more diligent about reading now than I was like a year and a half, 2 years ago, because I'm using AI so often. I don't want to become a Neanderthal.
If you were one person and you want to start a $100 million company, how would you start that?
Ooh.
We all get the same 24 hours. So why is it that some people build so much more with them? I'm Brian Koons, and this is the Builder Nation podcast, where we talk to top performers, entrepreneurs, and visionaries to uncover the architecture of a meaningful and fulfilling life. Let's get into it.
Welcome to another episode of the Builder Nation podcast. So I got my boy Christian Johnson here. So tell me, everyone's been talking about AI like a buzzword or like this black hole that no one understands. And most people either don't understand it or they're not actually using it to make money. So over the next 10 years, small businesses are going to have almost unlimited potential to scale. Not because they hire more people, but because they have use of smarter systems. So like I said, Christian Johnson, Marine Corps veteran, powerlifter, and operator, where if there's anyone that I know that's going to make $1 billion this next 10 years building a company with AI, it is hands down you. So I'm super excited to talk about it today. And the first thing I want to get into is, what is the easiest way for a small business owner, solopreneur, somebody who's building a business to leverage AI to make money?
That was a big statement. I appreciate that introduction.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you're starting from ground zero.
You have a business, it's already existing, but you want to look at leveraging AI because you just know that it makes sense. You don't necessarily know how yet, though.
Okay, absolutely. So the first thing you'd want to do is you need to leverage and create a digital twin system, right? So
what is that?
A digital twin system is essentially a infrastructure that allows you to store information that's tied to people, places, things. And so that every person in your company or every person that your company interacts with, every property has its own digital twin that basically knows everything about that individual asset, person, place, or thing. Make sense? And the reason why you want that is because a digital twin system, in order to be powerful, requires quite a lot of time to build up, right? Because you have to acquire that information. It's got to start building a history, right? So if I have a digital twin for you, right? Because we talk on my company phone. And so from 2 or 3 phone calls, it might be a little difficult for the AI to discern the exact relationship that you and I have. But after 10 phone calls, it's got a really nuanced understanding of how you and I interact. Does that make sense?
It does. So how would you use that in a business, or how do you start to gather that information?
So before you start thinking about how to use context and how it's going to be leverageable, you want to figure out the infrastructure to store the context so that you can use it in any or all business use cases. And so if I was starting from scratch today, I would start, even before I go to phone calls and text messages, I'd start with Google Meetings, right? So any internal company meeting, right? I would record that Google Meet, which automatically transcribes it. And I would deposit those recordings and those transcriptions into a central knowledge base, right? Because that's easy. You can do that in 15, 20 minutes, right? And so you're going to take a mode of communication, right? Google Meets, and you're going to deposit that into a knowledge center. So that's step number 1.
So tell me, what is the first task that any small business or entrepreneur should look at automating?
Okay, if you're a small business and you're an entrepreneur, that means you probably need to value your personal time to a high degree, right? Because you're probably wearing many hats. And so you need to leverage or do things that are going to leverage and expand your ability to exert influence on your company, right? So if I was starting a brand new company in a different business model than my own, the first thing I'm doing is creating a digital twin of myself.
What is that? What's a digital twin?
So a digital twin is essentially you creating a infrastructure that stores all of your communication history. And the way that the data is stored, it could be stored in a Google Sheet if you want to start off. It can be stored in a vector database. It can be stored in a ClickUp task infrastructure. The biggest thing is storing it. Start storing it.
And you're storing context.
You're storing,
right?
you're storing communication history, right?
Got
Which
it.
becomes context. So the
Yep.
raw data might be a text message between you and I, or a phone call transcript between you and I. And I'm going to start accumulating that data. And the reason why that's, in my opinion, the first step is because it enables you to move much faster on all the steps.
Right. So say I have a business where I have a couple employees, we're in a meeting and we're saying, hey, how are we going to do this system in the business, or how are we going to onboard new clients, right? We Google Meet the meeting, we record it. And now there's basically a flow of like how we're going to onboard clients. So you're saying that you're going to take that and store that to where later on, if you wanted to go and ask it, hey, what's step 2 of onboarding? It would then be able to pull that and tell you. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Absolutely. And if we're thinking more high level, like when you're an entrepreneur and you're doing 20 or 30 different hats, it's very easy to get lost in the sauce, not know what to tackle. And when you start centralizing communication so that your team can view your communication, right? You can view their communication, right? Within bounds, you create a lot of easy time leverage. For example, why are you disseminating tasks to your team after a meeting? Why are you doing that manually? Or are you not doing it at all and you're just hoping that they remember?
Mhm.
And so when you start centralizing communication, that is the first step. The second step is, okay, now that I have this communication history, how can I get other people on my team, my employees, to act on this communication history in order to free up more of my time? I would want to be able to walk away from a meeting with a client, which is how I've set up my company. And I hang up the call and I'm moving on to the next call, right? I'm not taking any notes. I'm not making any action items. I'm not telling my team anything. All that information deposits into that, let's say it's a homeowner or a lead, that leads context data and triggers a series of automations that come in behind me. And so if you're an entrepreneur, evaluate your highest and best use, right? Where is your highest ROI? Where you provide the most value to the company? Log all of your communication, look at the communication and say, how can I free up more of my time by distributing and delegating my tasks with a high level of context to my employees?
Okay, so let's use an example, right? Like most businesses, most small entrepreneurs, they're doing their sales calls, right? So they'll get somebody to book a sales call. They'll have that call. It sounds like there'd be a way to take basically as soon as you get off that phone call, if it's like a recorded Zoom, you could set up a couple of things where it's like, all right, it stores it in the CRM. It takes any action items, sends it to your follow-up team or whatever. And if it's like a closed contract, it sends over the contract form. Like, is that something that's realistic?
Oh yeah, people do that all the time. Automatically attributing your communication with a lead, a vendor, another employee, etc. That's like very easy and very fast to set up. And so we're talking about a couple different things. Like the first thing is like the pure action of consolidating your communication. So it goes into one central location so you can search it yourself. That you have to start doing that, because in any business, you have to find a way to take your expertise, all of those tips and tricks and guidance that you give to your team ad hoc, and start creating standard operating procedures, ways to delegate tasks, etc. And so when you centralize all of your communication, it's much easier for you to, let's say, pump an entire day of communication into a LLM, right? ChatGPT.
And what's an LLM?
Large language model.
Okay.
So ChatGPT,
Yep.
right? You could pump that entire day of communication, be like, hey, what are some gaps I might have missed? Some follow-ups, that I said I was going to do or didn't do. Or, hey, from this, what are reliable standard operating procedures that you can discern from the way I interact with my team and in the guidance I've given them today? And so logging the communication is step number one. That's the first thing I would do. Once you have the communication, your brain is going to start realizing, okay, how do I get this to be delegatable, and start creating that company knowledge base.
Okay. And as a small business owner, what are some of the best AI tools to look at implementing first?
If I had to pick one tool, right, I would probably honestly use ClickUp. I've become a big ClickUp fan, mostly because it's got an amazing API surface area, basically meaning that almost everything you can do via ClickUp through a human clicking on a mouse and a keyboard, you can do via API, which means that if you are expanding your tech infrastructure over time, you can automate more and more and more with external services and connect, your software, your ClickUp account with a bunch of external.
And that's what API keys are at a high level, right? It's basically the thing that allows you to connect ClickUp to Gmail. And then
Exactly.
when something happens in Gmail, ClickUp gets notified because it's the translation bridge between the two, right?
Yeah. And ClickUp's like kind of claim to fame is the everything app, right? And so as the everything app, they basically tried to take all of the best parts of Slack, right? The channel creations, the DMs, etc., with the best parts of Google Drive and Google Docs and all these other platforms to create a somewhat holistic 80% solution of these are the best parts so that you can have one place to do all your work. And I think that's the biggest theme for me as I built out our current AI infrastructure is how do I get my company's information architecture and task infrastructure and all this stuff into one consolidated location so that AI can leverage it, my employees can leverage it, and they're not using multiple apps and saying, do I text them? Do I Slack them? Do I email them? And there's one location that they know to check.
And is that something, so, I mean, you bring up a really good point, like real estate development, for example, we're WhatsApping contractors, we are emailing architects, we're phone calling other people. Like, is there a way to get all the communication in one centralized place?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what we've done. And that's what I think once you've done the context, right? Like consolidating the context, you're going to find, man, like how do I capture my text messages, my text message threads? How do I take the entire thread history between you and I from the last couple of days and put that in as like a chunk, right? Because individual text messages might be hard to like discern information from. So once you start consolidating your Google Meets, you're going to start realizing the benefits your company is going to get a quick win. And I think quick wins in business are always super important. We have to remember we're like dopamine driven
Progress
organisms. And to see the impact of a month of every single meeting being recorded and then looking at the insights, like, hey, how often is this employee late? How often, like, what are the top 5 roadblocks that we're experiencing for an obstacle?
What problem keeps getting brought up that isn't getting fixed?
Exactly. And so when you start doing that, you're like, okay, I need to expand this to everything. And that's exactly what happened with us, right? Yeah. And so we went from just Google Meets to obviously recording text message threads, and I can tell you about how to do that, to every phone call being automatically transcribed, not recorded, but transcribed. We have the option record, but we typically don't. To all of our guest messages being logged to their digital twin.
As an Airbnb manager, that's something we didn't mention. Airbnb manager with a lot of properties. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And so our system automatically attributes the phone call we made earlier to both you and I. And so kind of speaking at a high level, what you want out of your communication architecture is you want every digital twin that you create to have a single key that's tied to it. And so what do I mean by a key or a primary key is, Brian, you have a number, right, in my system. And your number registers your name to your email address, to your phone number, etc. Right? It's a way for any communication to come in and search that primary key table and be like, this is that number, right? And we've done a lot of like normalization of the data, to trim white spaces and normalize phone numbers into a certain format, etc. The goal being, you contact me in any medium, your data is being tied to your digital twin. And if you contacted my employee, their digital twin, if you contacted me, our digital twin, group chat, everybody's digital twin. And so the cool thing about a digital twin when you set up correctly is that it knows everything that your employee should know besides in-person communication that's not being recorded, which in my company is actually not allowed. You have to record any formal communication, and we don't use personal cell phones.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. So to kind of bring it just a little bit more from the basics, right? So you have prompt engineering, from my understanding, you have context engineering.
Yes.
You have system engineering. And then are those kind of like the 3 main, if somebody's in the beginning of their stages? Because I want to make sure that, everyone thinks, ChatGPT is like all there is for AI, right? So from my understanding is like prompt engineering is like actually giving them the task. The context engineering is making sure that the context that they have to base that task on, where ChatGPT normally just bases it on the internet. It's formalized in a way, like, so if you're a business owner, like you pick and choose, like, hey, this is exactly how we do this. I don't want you to go on McDonald's and see how they make burgers. I'm giving you my recipe and this is how we always make burgers. That's context, right? Like, would that be?
Yes. And you're hitting on it, right? So if we had to think about what makes AI successful at doing a one task, and it is the combination of a well-defined directive, right? This is what I want you to do, with this is the process to do that thing, right? That's the standard operating procedure. And finally, what is the context that should guide the standard operating procedure? So when we write standard operating procedures in my company, as an example, we have branches, right? Depending on the context of the situation present, the AI navigates these branches in a deterministic fashion, meaning like how we handle a 5-star review from a guest is mechanically different than a 3-star review. They take completely different branches, right? And so in order for AI to be successful, you have to give it the right task, the right way to do the task, and think about the task in the right context.
What's the best way to task AI?
With those 3 components. And so there's probably has not been many opportunities or times where you've used AI and given it a bunch of information about you and the problem, and it gave you a response that if an employee gave you that response, you wouldn't be happy with, right? And so if you go back to that principle, right, AI is now at the point where you're going to get extremely reliable outputs, especially compared to a lot of employees. Your goal as a business owner is, how do I start positioning my company for eventual ambient AI that interacts with our system and our data in our event stream, just in an ambient fashion where it decides what tasks to do and how to do them and executes them. And so it's going to be a while before you get there if you're starting from scratch. And the way to do that effectively is to start creating standard operating procedures with clear triggers, like, hey, you employ this standard operating procedure when X happens. And you can build those out quickly by taking the Google Meets and turning them into standard operating procedures, right? And giving it feedback. And then finding a way to take the context that I have for you, and when a task involves you, being able to bring in that context. So if we are thinking about a standard operating procedure, you might have in the military a standard operating procedure for like, hey, this is how we deploy forces on a beachhead that's unoccupied versus occupied. In the context of whether it's occupied or not,
the whole thing changes.
So everything changes. Yeah. Everything changes. And so you have to remember that AI is only as good as the data that you give in, right? You put in, garbage out. And so you got to figure out a way to do that context engineering at scale, where you're not manually connecting this task with Brian, and right. Otherwise you're creating efficiency in your work, but you're not automating your work.
Yeah. I think you're bringing up a good point with it of like the garbage in, garbage out thing. So many people think that AI, it's there now, right? And you can use it or you're confused by it, whatever, but there's such a different output for what you're getting when you actually spend an extra 2 to 5 minutes prompting it. And that's this prompt engineering, right? Like there's entire job categories now of prompt engineering where it's people who understand, if you could break down a prompt into effective prompt, what is an effective AI prompt? Or what does it include?
Okay. So you're asking me like, how do I make an effective prompt?
Yeah. What are the key components of an effective AI prompt?
Okay. So in general, when you're making an effective prompt, you want to remember that the end result of the model that you're interacting with is it's making a prediction, a statistical prediction based off of all the information you've given it.
All the context, right?
The context, right? It's going to give you a prediction. Okay. So when you're building out the prompt, you're trying to put the prediction in your favor. Okay. And so typically how I structure most prompts, not all prompts, my coding prompts are very different than like my customer service prompts, is I give the LLM obviously a persona. You are X, right? I give it a skill set, right? This is how you think through problems, etc.
Yeah, give me an example of like how you would think through, or what you would give if it was something operations related.
Okay, operations related, like handling a maintenance issue.
Yeah, like this person sent this email to us with something broke in the house, right? And you need to send a response to them. Like,
okay, so it's really more customers. Okay, yeah. So I would give it, hey, this is your persona. So you are a guest message coordinator, right? For my Airbnb management company, you receive incoming messages from guests who are staying at my Airbnbs or about to stay at my Airbnbs. You're going to receive this message, and your job is to execute the following process to, and actually, I wouldn't do one AI agent for this, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But if you had to one shot it, so I build like the rough persona, right? Then the role would be defined as like very clearly, all you do is draft the message, right? So you don't want the AI to output like, here's the draft message. And we suggest adding these, and here's follow-up actions for your team. You want it to know all you're allowed to do is draft a message, right? And then I would give it the framework for how to think about the problem, right? And then the output requirements. That's like a typical formula. For me, for complex situations like guest messaging, where I want really high fidelity responses, I almost never use a single agent for that. And so our guest messaging system is set up with every message is looked at by about 5 different AI agents. That basically determines, one, what context is needed in order to answer this guest message. 2, read the entire message thread and what's the core problem that you as the message coordinator needs to solve. Is it answering a question? Is it following up with the guest on an issue, a present issue, and asking clarifying details, etc. The third agent basically does a qualitative analysis of the both to determine what route it goes. Are we looking up the home policy? Are we looking up the general policy agent, etc.? And then I have a message generator who actually generates the final message, and then a tone modifier who modifies the tone so I'm not using in dashes, etc. And so for complex, high fidelity situations, you want to think about creating an agent system that works just like you would almost train an employee. If I was training an employee on how do I handle this message, I would say, okay, first you need to look at, like, do you need any more information on it? Yeah, I need to understand more about the property. Okay, go look at the property information. Come back from that. Is there enough information about the property in order for you to determine how to handle this guest refund request? No, this property doesn't have a guest refund request policy specific to it. Then it uses our fallback policy. You can find the fallback policy here, right? So long answer to your prompt question, but generally, your prompts should be very, very well defined and narrow in focus. So I'm not going to use one agent to evaluate the policy and do this, do that, do that. I'm going to use one LLM to do that one specific operation, and then I'm going to move on and use that output for the next one.
Okay. And to clarify, what's the difference between standard ChatGPT and an AI agent?
Good question. So an AI agent is essentially giving the ability to an OpenAI model, Anthropic model, any of the major AI models to execute multiple actions in a sequence, call tools, etc., and use its judgment to take action. Okay. Typically, I have found that the amount of time required to create a mostly linear process and to ensure that the responses and the output from that are high fidelity is almost always less than trying to get an agent to work.
So you'd actually recommend using agents instead?
I would recommend not
using agents.
It requires less time. The reason why is that I care more about learning from my process and logging like each node's train of thought. So we log the entire train. Right. And a node is like, let's say we're talking about the guest messaging and we're talking about it goes through these different phases and there's different LL at each stage, right? OpenAI model. If we're talking NAN, right? It's a node. It's like a single point in the system. And we're logging basically every step along the way. And so we've got a one row in our Supabase data table that says, this was the incoming guest message. This was the message thread. This what the first agent got. This what they outputted. Second agent, right? I'd rather have that data than an AI agent, one node who tries to do all of it. And all of the logic is internalized to that node and is making these internal decisions that are, from a technical perspective, much harder to log and to discern what's going right or wrong. Either the agent works and you're like, heck yeah, I just consolidated this 9-step workflow into 3 steps, or it doesn't. And debugging it becomes very difficult. Yeah.
So high level, you have the large language model where you can just go on ChatGPT and you can type in something and it gives you a bunch of text back. Or if you have actual steps, like say, hey, I have an email and and it came with an invoice, right?
Mm.
That invoice, I want the AI to be able to read the email, understand what that document is that is an invoice, and know where to store that document and respond saying, hey, we just, you have a new invoice, right?
Mm.
In order to do that, there's a lot of tools that go into that, right? You need Excel if you're going to be tracking it. You need Google Drive access. You need access to Gmail. And so what you're saying is each one of those nodes is, hey, you check Gmail, right? And so it has like access to Gmail. Is that accurate?
Kind of. So what we're talking about is like, and I'm going to take one step back and then I'm going to circle there. For if you are a small business and you're trying to integrate AI into your daily workflows, that's a specific example is not something you would want to optimize at the beginning.
Okay.
Right. So you would start from the very ground up. What's taking your specific time up the most? You shouldn't be handling like the payment of invoices typically. Right.
Mm.
And so if you're, let's say, spending your development money on optimizing a role that a VA is doing for $8 an hour, you save her, let's say 15, 30 minutes a day. You've basically created almost no monetary value via that automation.
Yeah.
And so the first thing you would do is look at how to automate yourself, right? Creating the digital twin, leveraging your time, et cetera. I just want to emphasize that.
I think that's a really important part to dive in because that just like clicked for me a little bit. Is like, yeah, you could, automate like email management. Right? Emails if they take, whatever time or you have a VA helping you out with it already. Like for me, for example, I'm thinking my highest best uses are finding projects and keeping, following up with my investors.
Hey guys, if you're a business owner, high income earner, or investor who's been thinking about getting into real estate development but don't have the time to manage the process, this is for you. My company partners with people like you to help unlock the potential of your properties or even source and manage new small scale development projects. We manage hundreds of ADUs and infill development projects across Southern California, and our team knows how to simplify the process so you can benefit from the upside without managing contractors, permits, or design headaches. Whether you want to develop your own property, explore ways to offset taxes, or just learn how the development model works, head to thebuildernation.com/partner. That's thebuildernation.com/partner and see how we can help you build more with the same 24 hours. Now back to the show.
That,
right?
Following up with your investors, that's where you automate your time.
Mm-hmm.
Because out of all the things that you cannot outsource, people trust you.
Yep.
Right. And I will tell you from having done successful partnerships and not successful partnerships, the communication you have with your partners is incredibly important. There are partnerships where our internal communication have been amazing and those are low stress situations. And the ones where it's not been, it's been extremely stressful. So for you in particular, finding a way to leverage your ability to provide really good investor relationships is what I would spend your time.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a really good question to ask is like, what things are not outsourceable, but take up a lot of time? I think is probably a good way to put it.
Yeah. And so how often right now are you time blocking your day? Right. And going into your calendar and saying, this is how much time I'm going to spend progressing these portions of my business. When you start doing that, what you're going to notice is you're going to get to the end of time blocks and feel like, okay, I'm not making enough traction here. I actually need to expand this time block or I need to shrink it. You're going to start seeing where you put your time. Out of those items, you need to find ways to delegate where possible. And then once you get to something where you can't delegate, you start thinking, okay, how can I use all of the context that's in my brain in order to make this process faster for myself? And the other tip I would give you is the amount of effort required for a small business to go from, on a particular process, 0% to 80% automated is usually with current AI tools, the ability to do AI coding and generate NAM workflows is like a very small amount of time with a high ROI. That to take it from 80% to 100%, right? Where there's no human in the loop at all, no human intervention is typically for any standard operating procedure. That is where 80% of the work is. And so you can typically get a huge ROI with that 20% of effort and then circle back once most of your core processes are at that 80% mark. and start closing the loop on which ones you feel like, okay, now what? The risk of automation here is low, impact is high. I'm going to do that.
Okay. So how do you make AI part of your company culture?
Ooh, really good question. It starts with the interview process, right? So when I interview and I tell people what we're trying to achieve, the first thing I tell them is like, listen, you're going to be able to view all my phone calls. You're going to be able to view all my text messages I get on my company line and vice versa, right? And we do, anonymize certain parts of the data, like credit card numbers, stuff like that. And I'm going to be able to view all your information. I want you to know that our company has a culture of high accountability, but nobody's going into your phone call. Nobody has time. Nobody wants to do that. We're not looking over your shoulder. And so the pro of that is you're going to be able to have a system where you're not asking 3 or 4 different employees for what happened at this property, trying to get the context, who was on shift, right? It's automatically disseminated. So I give them the pros and I give them the cons, right? I think it starts with the interview process. They got to know that the culture you're creating is one where it's highly transparent and you value operational efficiency.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, people who are still old school or they just are, still trying to just figure out AI as a whole and integrating, you're hearing large language models, vector databases, AI agents, things like that. Like, I mean, there's like somebody like that, right? They come to you and maybe a lot of, I think business owners, entrepreneurs are much more visionary than they are operator and integrator. So if somebody like that, what do you think some of the best tasks to automate would be?
Let's narrow the scope a little bit. So you're asking me, a business owner comes to me, right? And we're at the gym. We're hitting bench press. You come up to me like, hey, what do I automate? I think that's a hard question.
Yeah. So we'll use my company, right, as an example, development management company, right? So I'm managing emails, I'm managing, investors, I'm looking for projects, I'm underwriting deals. I'm doing a lot of these things to like get development projects on, get them through the process. So I have some things that I've thought about is like being essentially the email management, but all of the subcategories of tasks that go into that, being able to respond to emails, things like that, based on the context of the other emails. That sounds like that may not be the best use of my time, or like in investors or even finding properties. Like let's say I wanted to like find properties on market or off market and I wanted to leverage AI. How would I leverage AI to find deals off market?
Okay. So let's do the first one, right? Because the emails, because if I said something contradictory, I apologize. I think the overall concept of being able to respond to emails, right, with the history of all the other emails with somebody else is very high leverage, right? The taking the attachment and opening up Excel and putting it there, low leverage, right? In the beginning. And so how would you automate that process? Let's say if you wanted to do that entire process. The first thing I would do is I would create a trigger that whenever you receive a new email, right? And that's a trigger on NAN or Zapier, right? You say, hey, anytime this event occurs, I'm going to do XYZ, right? So you want to think about when you send an email and when you receive an email. And you're going to set up a very simple architecture, right? And you could do this on Google Sheets. You could do this on Supabase. You could ask Claude, how do I set up a Supabase table and insert rows via NAN? And within 15 minutes, you'll have an 80% solution. And you're going to say, okay, anytime I receive or send an email, I need to categorize that email and tie it to a person, right? And I need to also decide what emails do I not categorize, right? Do I need to auto classify my promotional emails so that I'm not creating digital twins for those people, right? So once you have the list of people, right, you then assign them a number, right? A primary key, like, hey, this is Brian's primary key. This is this person's primary key. And then what you do is you have another table, right, on Supabase, another tab on Google's spreadsheet that says, here's the communication I had with them. Here's the dates, timestamp, and it ties back to this primary key, right? So that you have basically the ability to say, give me all emails I ever had with Brian. Okay. Because when you're talking about responding to an email, it's very easy to respond to the entire thread context. The difficulty becomes multi-thread.
Right.
Context.
And I think of like my architects, for example, right? They send shit in so many different ways. Like they'll send 3 things that should be on the same email, throw it on 3 different ones. And then one of them is a mix of another project. Like it's a nightmare. So you can actually create the AI and train the AI in a way to say, okay, let's look at like, who this is from, for example, right? Any emails from this person or this email address, they get stored in this database, this vector, Google Drive or Google Sheets or, Supabase, whatever it is. And then anytime you receive a new email, it searches all of those previous emails and then bases the response off all of the context, not just that one singular email.
Yes, that's essentially it. And so you would, for every email, you would log, okay, this was from Brian to Christian. Those would be the two entities involved. If you had 3 people, 3 entities, right? And so the next step becomes eventually you have enough communication with somebody where you don't want all of the email history to be loaded and given to an AI because maybe it surpasses the token limits, et cetera.
Yeah. It becomes expensive, right? Because that's one thing people don't really understand is the more data you give something, the more expensive it is to search all of that data every time, right?
Essentially, yeah. And so a vector database is meant to increase the efficiency from a cost perspective and from a chat completions perspective by fetching the right information to answer the question. So if you were asking about a specific project, then it would go fetch all the emails from that architect about that specific project. Now, here's the problem, right? What is a vector, right? I think you had asked me that a couple of weeks ago. A vector is a mathematical representation of what the AI believes this chunk means, right? And so if we're talking about mathematical representations of word, Michael Jordan has a mathematical representation that is way closer to the word basketball than I do, my name, right? Or most people's names. And so it's not a great example, but I think you understand it. And so what happens with vector databases is if you take an entire email and you put that as one chunk, then it's taking the overall meaning of the email and comparing that to the question that's asked. And so the hard part about vector databases and the infrastructure and the setup is the context engineering piece of it is bridging that gap between North Elm Street and in Elm Street when it's inside a larger email that is maybe a page long, right? Because that page long can either be treated as one chunk in your vector database, multiple chunks, et cetera. And so that's why people, pay for AI consultants, because to set up that infrastructure, it's relatively easy if you know what to do. If you're doing that from a non-technical perspective, it becomes possible, especially with AI. You could do it, I promise you. Like you could figure it out pretty easily. You're smart enough for that, but it might not be worth your time.
Well, and that's a really good question that I want to ask you is, I'm a business owner. I have my superior skill sets in development and things like that. Whatever your business is, you have your special skill sets. Does it make sense to try and learn AI yourself to implement into your business, or should you hire someone?
Dude, that's a really good question. In general, the first step you have to do before you try to build anything is use AI. Use AI for almost everything that you absolutely can while preventing brain rot, right? Like you should still be reading. Like I'm way more diligent about reading now than I was like a year and a half, 2 years ago, because I'm using AI so often that I don't want to become a Neanderthal, right? But beyond that, you should use AI for anything and everything, because just like we grew up in the advent of like the internet, and it just became just really intuitive for us to interface with anything that has to do with, on-screen buttons and clicks, et cetera, because we used it so often. I remember the first time I jumped into Google Sheets and I just knew how to use it, right? Same thing with Excel. It wasn't hard. That's what's going to happen with AI, right? Your ability to use AI and to search up movie times, to do any small task that you usually Google is going to help your ability to understand its limiting boundaries and stuff like that. And so the first step is don't build out any AI infrastructure until you're actively using AI in your normal life and in your business manually through ChatGPT.
Okay. And so that's kind of like the actionable way is like basically just use ChatGPT or any of these other, AI language models basically for everything.
Yes. And that even applies when you know that your brain is going to provide a better response than the AI, right? The goal is not to copy and paste your emails. If you're a copy and paster, people will know that you're leveraging ChatGPT.
I hope this email finds you well.
Yeah, exactly. Or M dash, right? The goal is for you to leverage it and understand how to make it your own, how to interface it and ask it the right questions to challenge your limiting beliefs or to affirm your beliefs, right? To remove bias in how to structure your context. All this stuff is a skill set. So before you start hiring an AI engineer to do anything, go learn it, and don't try to learn NAN and all these other tools until you've, essentially done the manual stuff to its point of diminishing marginal returns.
Yeah. No, and like as somebody who doesn't, my background is not AI by any means. Like I probably use ChatGPT for 2 hours today already, and it's like 10 in the morning or 1 in the afternoon, whatever it is. But I think for a lot of people, like finding a way to just leverage it first to make you, and that's, I think a better way to put it is, AI at first is not to remove from your life, it's to make you more efficient.
Yes.
And I think that that's what a lot of people may miss is a lot of people, I think, think that AI is taking a lot of jobs, where I don't think it's taking jobs. I think that it's making people more efficient, and those can either choose, 10 times efficiency on 0% is still 0%. So
AI will take a lot of jobs. It absolutely would. That's
why is AI going to take a lot of jobs?
And I'm not saying that AI is going to create a net job loss or a net job surplus. All right. I'm not going to make any assumptions about that right now. Talking only about will AI take jobs away that are currently existing in the market? And the answer is a resounding yes. Right. Here's an example in my company. We have one person on shift who's able to answer for over 120 properties with active guests. And our average response time is typically somewhere like, I think our median right now is like 7 and like 0.3 minutes. And our mean is typically maybe a little bit higher because we have some outliers, right? Maybe, but less than 15 minutes. And our average communication rate on Airbnb is, I think it's like 4.96, which is pretty freaking fantastic. That would have probably taken me 2.5 years ago, a team of maybe on shift, especially during weekends, 4 to 6, depending on how fast and how well I wanted to communicate the guest. And not only do the communication, answer the guest message, but all the follow-on actions, right? Investigate the maintenance issue, escalate the maintenance issue, loop in the homeowner for their take on how they want this problem solved. It's not just answering a guest message. It's a lot of background tasks that go into any sort of question or response to a guest complaint.
So what do you think some of the most invaluable human skills are as AI rises?
I think real world empathy is like number one, right? In my business, hospitality, my goal is to keep the business human and further keep the business more human by allowing the people who are operating the business, the people answering the guest messages, to have more intellectual time spent serving the person as opposed to looking up the information and doing that minutia. And so we're ordering a custom guest gift for every single reservation that comes into our houses, right? And we do a pre-booking survey before every guest shows up. Like, hey, why are you coming? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Now we're asking them, like, what's your favorite? It's 2 a.m. and you've got a rumbling stomach. What's your favorite snack? Right? Dumb questions. And then we use that to order them a custom guest gift. I think the most important human actions are the ones that create connection or further the connection. And the ones that should absolutely be automated is all the background context gathering. This guest complained. Why did they complain? Has this been a past issue? Did we know about this maintenance task? Have we validated it? How does the homeowner deal with maintenance issues? Combine all of that context into a single document so that a good human in the loop decision can be made.
I think that's really huge. You explain that AI is a way for you to take the menial tasks out of what you do and literally leverage the time to be more human and give a more human response to it. Where I think a lot of people, they get really efficient or they find a way to use AI to give the answer. Then there's no thought of how do I actually make this feel like it's from a human?
Yeah, absolutely. And how do I put my spin on it with my knowledge that I have?
That makes a lot of sense, dude. So, bringing it home, I want to ask you like one more. How is AI going to divide middle class from the ultra wealthy?
I think that the middle class are going to have an exciting opportunity in front of them, right? These small business owners who are small enough right now where deeply integrating AI into their day-to-day operations is cost-effective and relatively not that time-consuming, right? Or intellectually difficult compared to maybe the larger enterprise players that are in their space who have a large amount of existing data infrastructure that would have to get reshaped to integrate AI deeply into their architecture. And so I think some small businesses, right, and the business owners who make up the middle class are going to have this Goldilocks zone in the next couple of years where they can absorb market share, right? So I think that exists. And I think that the ultra wealthy in general are probably going to stay ultra wealthy, right? Unless something happens to the modes of investment that they're using to compound their wealth, like real estate and stocks and bonds, stuff like that. Unless they royally screw up, I think the wealthy are going to stay pretty freaking wealthy. But I think that the middle class is going to have this Goldilocks zone. And I think that's also present for individuals in the lower income brackets right now. The ability to learn AI and be a first mover and to become indispensable to other businesses, or to start your own one-man business and build a $100 million company as a single person, there is the opportunity for that. There is a framework for that.
I have one last question for you now. Last question now. So if you were one person and you want to start $100 million company, how would you start that?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So the first thing I would do is I would analyze. I've actually never thought about this, but let me.
You said it and it made me curious about it.
I think the first thing I would do is I would analyze the business, the available value propositions that I would want to deliver. Right. And then I would evaluate the risk of value proposition being quickly absorbed by another competitor. Basically, essentially like, hey, if you are a tech startup company who made image generation, right? And you were trying to grow that product because you had a cool model that you developed or whatever, that's a bad business model, right? Because months later, the next tool that comes out is going to crush you, right? And absorb your market share with their existing subscription fees. And so the first thing is you have to analyze, like, what am I offering? Am I offering a tech product? Okay, if I'm offering a tech product, the first thing I'm doing is no technology that I create should be able to be absorbed by the creation of better models, more multimodal capabilities, etc. My business model needs its success to be compounded when these other large enterprise players succeed, right? And so any success that they have, my business model needs to improve on the tech side, right? On the services side, I would look for high ticket sales, like a high ticket customer that requires a somewhat complicated or niche understanding for that sale and value delivery to occur. And that would do obviously competitive analysis, like, okay, who else is in the space? And I would figure out, how do I learn this industry, become extremely proficient in it, like doing manual work? And then how can I run this company delivering the entire value stream by myself, right? So I'd want to pick, a value delivery mechanism that has multiple steps. That's not a single step, because I wouldn't want somebody to develop a web tool that does that. So I'd want multiple steps, which starts to restrict the number of people in the automation world who are like, oh, I'm going to go create like a quick tool for this.
Right.
Right. But not too many steps where I create a very difficult and fragmented process that would be almost impossible for a one-man team.
Okay. So what you're saying is find an industry or some sort of service-based industry where technology doesn't make you obsolete. It improves your ability to be more efficient in the space.
Yeah.
You're really fucking good at that.
Yeah. I would get really good at that. And I would say, if you look ahead, you're also going to be pretty successful. And what I mean by that, the way that I'm setting up my company and the way I've set up the infrastructure is that the AI that we have integrated directly into our systems is already extremely helpful, but it's not going to make a $100 million company, let alone a $1 billion company. 0% chance. But the way I've set up the data systems architecture and the way that we're storing the information and how it's being tied and interconnected has been set up so that as we get closer to AGI.
What is AGI?
Basically a general intelligence that surpasses most, human intelligence. And so you can almost think about it kind of like a AI that is multimodal, meaning it can look at images, browser screens, text, files, movies, videos, and it can learn new skills, teach yourself new skills, employ those skills actively when it gets the right task in front of it. And so we're talking about all of this that seems like, man, we're really far away from that. But, OpenAI is committing $500 billion to this effort. And so it's probably going to come fast, right? And so I would leverage or think ahead, like, is there any model where I might not be able to create $100 million company as a one-person team, but I could maybe create a $1 million company with a one-person team. And as soon as the AI fidelity gets to this mark, I'll have the almost infinite ability to scale. Then that's probably how I would approach it.
Dude, that is amazing, man. There's so much stuff here. Like, it's probably a lot for the listeners, but I think that the high level is like, AI is not going away. It will only make people more efficient, and you have to get on board now. Otherwise, you're going to fall behind.
Yeah, find ways to integrate it. Find ways, even when it's uncomfortable and you're like, this might be faster if I use my own brain, to incorporate it into your workflows. Because ultimately, the bigger thing is practice.
No, it makes sense, man. Dude, there's so much good game here. If people want to get in touch with you, Airbnb or any side of it, what's the best way to get in contact?
If they're coming through you, give them my personal cell phone. If they're coming through, Instagram, I'd hit me up on Instagram. Oh yes, invest. OHYES, invest.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Dude, it's been an amazing episode. Thank you so much.
Thank
and
you.
We'll see you guys in the next episode.
That's it for this episode of the Build a Nation podcast. If it gave you something to think about, hit subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who's leveling up. Until next time, keep building.